Dr. Eleanor Drage, the host of the Good Robot podcast. Join me as I ask the experts, what is good technology? Is it even possible? And how can feminism and other justice-seeking movements help us work towards it? If you want to learn more about today's topic, there's a full transcript of the episode at thegoodrobot.co.uk, along with an especially curated reading list by every guest. I love hearing from listeners, so feel free to reach out on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, or through my Cambridge email address. And don't forget to leave a review on whichever platform you're listening from. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to The Good Robot. This is Eleanor Drage, and today we're going to be talking to the awesome David Griffiths, who's founding director of Then Try This, a non-profit research, design and development organisation based in Cornwall in the UK, who works on environmental and social projects. So the buzzwords around this will be citizen science and community technology and participatory science and technology. And one of the reasons why I'm talking to him today is because I wrote an article in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, and it went down really well on frugal tech and saying that the most amazing innovations of the moment aren't just further iterations of GPT, but really cool stuff that's being designed in low resource environments by people who are doing more with less. So I'm really excited to speak to David today. Our first question is, what do you do and what brings you to the subject of technology and justice?
So I run this organisation, independent research organisation, with my partner Amber, and I think it's always very difficult to explain, but I think it's best to explain in that we are trying to do research a bit differently, or just do things a bit differently. So my partner's background was in academia, and my background was in commercial corporate research and development. So we were both doing things how you're supposed to do them, and we both sort of reached a point in our careers where it wasn't making any sense anymore, and we had to just try something else. And we decided to just try and build something that did things in a more interesting way, I think. In terms of this sort of first question around gender and feminism and technology, so I suppose my personal background is that I was one of these quite annoying generation of people that learned to program when I was about 11 in the 80s on a ZX Spectrum computer in the front room of our house and plugged into our TV. But in the same room as that was this enormous floor loom, because my mum was a weaver. And so on a Saturday morning, I would be sat there trying to make different patterns of pixels on a screen. My mum would be there weaving patterns on her loom. And it was just immediately obvious to both of us that we were doing the same thing. So obviously there's a sort of a superficial sort of surface level similarity between the stitches and textiles and pixels on the screen, but it was also the way that you have to approach it. So she was really more interested in essentially programming the loom. So warping the loom, setting it all up to do a series of patterns. And I was kind of more interested in writing the code and understanding it, but then making some patterns and then deleting it and starting again, and not really having it sort of process sort of our products at the end of it.
I love this, that because you're doing these two different activities in the same space, it allows you to see the points of connection between the two in a way that, because weaving and tech development are done in many different places, but really are never done together, that proximity isn't allowed to emerge in the same way. So can you tell us then, we are the Good Robots, this is our kind of pithy provocation. What is good technology to you? And is it even possible? How do we work towards it?
So I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and it's difficult to add much more to what people have said already on your show. So I suppose for me, it's thinking about technology that acknowledges the sort of social and political environment that it's made in, and who made it and who it's for. And I think this is what makes it different from this kind of idea that technology just exists in isolation. So it's completely detached from everything else. It's a subject in its own right. And it doesn't really make sense in that world, in that kind of complete isolated world. And the problem with that, or maybe the opportunity of accepting that it's a human thing, just like politics and history and all the things around it, is that it allows criticism. So then you can ask questions as to why this piece of technology is shaping my behavior in this way, or why are things built in a certain way? Do they have to be? And it sort of requires a bit more confidence about technology. I see it seems actually like a lot of the way things are built, there's not a lot of trust of people. There's kind of an assumption that you understand all the uses that people are going to have for it. And so I think good technology accepts that maybe the people using it know more than you do and allow it to be reconfigured and maybe changed and questioned in a different way.
I really like how you said that if we design and see technology as a social artifact, then it opens it to critique. And this seems exactly right, because the reason why the assumption that technology is neutral or objective exists is because then it stops people from, how can you possibly critique an objective tool, a neutral tool? So it opens it up to all sorts of things that science has been afraid of for a long time, or the scientific context, I should say. So the trust element's really important, because what I hear a lot, particularly from governmental funding bodies to foundations, is how can we improve public trust in AI? But you can only get people to trust trustworthy tools, which leads us to the next question of participatory design. Do you think that trust and trustworthiness have to come together? Or what's the relationship between trust and trustworthiness, and how does participatory design help us work towards both?
So I think participatory design is sort of part of a long series of these kind of approaches like co-design and user-centered design, which are, I guess, trying to put names on a way of getting around this. Also, how do we build these things into how we make things? Tends to come, I think, more from an academic side, but it's certainly something that we kind of pick up a lot and do with the kind of work that we do, and just try and, I guess it's just a way of making a bit more common sense, I suppose, with this kind of thing.
So the participatory design has become a bit of a buzzword, and it's interesting that you write buzzwords on your website as things that you're aware of. My colleague Tom Holonek is a specialist in looking at all the participatory design methods there are around and distilling them into something that's good and useful and works. For you, what is participatory design, and what are the kind of pitfalls that should be avoided?
I think for us, there's a lot of things that we use kind of open source and open hardware approaches, and that's almost so part of what we do that we don't actually talk about it very much. But I think that actually is quite a good underpinning of it, because we don't seek to have exclusive ownership over anything that we're making. And if we aren't doing that, and because we're a non-profit and we're interested in more fostering communities than developing tools that we then sell and have to own, people are a bit more happy to work with us and to contribute to something that then is shared. And this goes for not just the sort of technological stuff, but when we're working with community groups and we publish papers, we will invite them to be co-authors on a paper that's open access. And so it's about that ownership. So if people have ownership over something, then they trust it. And all of these methods are great ways of doing that and kind of trying to encourage that, I think.
Which totally makes sense. I mean, if you're going to contribute to something, you want to feel like it belongs to you in a certain way. And that's why a lot of people feel like engaging in democratic processes isn't working, because they have no ownership over the result, over the state of the country, when they've made their vote and nothing's happened and nothing's changed, and they have no control. You've come up with an incredible project called Sonic Kayaks. So can you tell us what a Sonic Kayak is and what you built them for?
So, a Sonic Kayaks started off right back at the beginning as an arts project with Kath Matthews, where we were putting sound onto bikes. Actually, so we were messing about with GPS. We put really big speakers on the handlebars, and it's still a project that she's running in different cities around the world and putting sounds over different places in a city, and you could cycle around and explore. And the sort of the maps of the city were like sonic scores that you could explore on a bike. And originally, so we're based in Cornwall. We were always talking about sort of trying it here because I was testing it out when we were building the system. But Cornwall is a terrible place for cycling. It's just really steep hills, narrow roads, and fast drivers. So we always thought maybe we could try this with kayaks instead. And so working with Amber on this project as a scientist, she said that it was only kind of going to work if we could make it into a citizen science project as well. So there's a huge amount of information that you can get if you're on a kayak. So a Sonic Kayak doesn't just have GPS and sound on it. It also has a temperature sensor, a turbidity sensor. We put air pollution sensors on them. We basically take all of this information, turn it into sound, and we have it playing out of waterproof Bluetooth speakers on the kayak. A Sonic Kayak basically extends your senses under the water so you can hear what's going on as you're paddling around. So things like gradients of temperature, you can actually hear all of this stuff going on. And we also put hydrophones on as well, so you can hear any kind of forms of life that are making sound underneath your kayak or approaching boats with engines, which is a bit more common.
And who were they for?
Originally, it was for people who were kayaking who wanted to collect data on the marine environment. So it's interesting that we don't actually have a lot of information on tidal estuaries. So places that are really important because of climate change, where fish spawn. We don't actually have a lot of information on that. We have a lot of information sort of out to sea where you have satellite coverage, but it's quite difficult. So researchers were looking for ways of getting information from these places. Yeah, so we worked with people interested in kayaking and wanted to collect data and understand more about the world. And then we had another group interested because this was kind of just testing it out and seeing what we could get. And then we had a local kayak group called Access Lizard Adventure who work with people with sight loss, and they were looking at ways of enabling people to have a bit more confidence on the water and kayak around on their own. And they saw that we were doing things with sensors and sounds, and they thought this would work really well for the people that they were working with. So then we had a really kind of specific audience that we could target it for.
And these are blind people, right? And I love that, you were saying before that people didn't want to go always in tandem in kayaks. Like people want to go out on their own and experience being out in the water. It's just you and the water and the soundscape and the right that we all have to experience that, feeling of solitude and quiet, being by ourselves. So I love these.
Yeah, this is something that we had to work really hard on, because when we were doing this with bikes in cities, we had to basically battle the traffic and play lots of loud sounds, and you could kind of get away with anything. But when you're on the kayaks, what was the first feedback that we had from people who were testing it is actually we want less sound, so that when nothing's changing, it actually goes silent, so you can just stop and listen to what's around, and only have things change when you paddle or you kind of something changes.
Yeah, I guess there's that temptation to feel like you have to do more when you create a soundscape. You have to make sure that there's always something to be tuning into, but really it's the silence. And the ability to enjoy silence is only possible if you know that you're not next to a rock or about to go in the wrong direction or whatever. You had this other project called Nergal, named after the Mesopotamian god of disease. Tell us about that.
So this was to find out about the relationship between disease and social networks. And it's actually quite a difficult thing to do, despite having gone through a global pandemic. It's quite a difficult thing to find out about because of ethics. You can't take a population, track everybody's friends, and introduce a disease. And so we worked with Matthew Silk at University of Edinburgh, and we uh, decided to make a computer game where we could kind of emulate some of these behaviors. So we don't need to find out about like in great detail about how this happens. We just needed enough information from a game, from playing a simple game. So with a game, you can introduce a disease and you can have a social network that you track exactly. But we had to be quite careful making a game world because the topic is so serious. Um, that we have to sort of have quite a light touch. So hand drawn characters, kind of nice, familiar kind of world, but also not too realistic. So it's a world that you can wander around. You can talk to the plants and the characters and your friends and strangers and kind of make new friends and uh, kind of just explore. And then at some point, yeah, this disease gets introduced and people start sneezing, and yeah, your different behaviors is what we're interested in, because some people immediately unfriend everybody and go off and talk to the plants on their own, and other people try and be friends as possible because then you get lots of food. So there's a lot of trade-off to this, and we all experienced that in the pandemic. Like you could really kind of just completely self-isolate, but then that had a cost as well. Or you could kind of make a bubble with somebody and have some connection. And there's a trade-off there in how we behave.
Yeah, absolutely. You were saying that this is about collecting data on the spread of disease on social networks, both for sighted and non sighted people. What's the relationship between that and yeah?
So yeah, this we work with the same a lot of the same people on this. So Eyesight Cornwall were a charity we work with on the kayaking project, and we contacted them again because we were interested in if we could make a game like this work if you didn't have sight. So there's a lot of citizen science projects. There's a lot of kind of health policy things like this, but not none of it that we're aware of really targets uh, disability too much. And they tend to be is tend to be a kind of forgotten group with a lot of public health policy. So we did a workshop where we invited lots of the people that work with Eyesight Cornwall, um, and we asked them about lots of things. So about how they play computer games, what's important in terms of audio cues, whether they use text to speech and how it's used, and also just experiences during the pandemic. So the fact that it's really hard to social distance if you can't see anybody, and the responses they would get from people because they couldn't do that meant that there was a lot more isolation and it was a very difficult time. But so finding out about things like where they play games and turn like the text to speech up to its maximum speed, and you learn how to hear that and how to understand that by sort of doing it. The fact that a lot of games aren't designed to work particularly well, but there are ways of hacking them and kind of manipulate and using different tools to play these games. And then the second workshop we did, we took a lot of the feedback. We tried to get something working based on that feedback, and then they did a play testing session where they could tell us what they thought of it all as well.
Which is very cool because you're working with the ingenuity of how non sighted or partially sighted people are, managing to make these games work for them
Yeah, and
because,
it
yeah,
makes
they're
the game
fun.
better for everybody as well. I think that's the thing with these sorts of it's like people that are experts at listening, and you can find out how to make that better for everybody.
Yeah. The there's an artist called Carmen Papalio who's blind and he has there's lots of different ways of getting people to experience New York. in a way that kind of matches his experience as a non-sighted person. And one of the things he gets people to do is go onto the High Line in New York and hold the person in front of them's shoulder. And the idea is that you sort of have a more immersive experience of New York anyway, because you know, oh, I'm under the tunnel now because I can hear from my voice being carried from the ground up, and these different ways of experiencing senses,
Yeah.
which is so amazing to get this insight into the world, and enrich your own way of experiencing the world, even if you can see. So, what to you was something that you learned about how you could make a game more interesting, more sensorial through the input of the people you're working with?
So one of the things that we worked, actually, I think it came originally from when we were working on the kayaks, was that you can learn to hear the sound of different trees. So the way that leaves move actually are different for different trees, and you can actually identify the trees based on the sound, which was really amazing to walk around with somebody that can do that. And so that was one of the things that we put in, was different sounds for different plants, and really kind of filled the world with that. The other thing we did that was really important was to describe. So there's a button that you've got to describe the world around you, and it reads it out as a clock face. So it says at 12 o'clock, there's a plant, one of these plants. At 3 o'clock is a friend of yours, and kind of to do it out as well in terms of paces as to how far away they are. And you sort of really get into that. You're kind of describing the world in that way, but keeping it quite short as well. So it's not a really lengthy description, but trying to get the maximum amount of detail in. Yeah, that's I think was one of the really fun things to put there.
That's very cool. And it speaks to this trend right now, also in interactive design and human computer interaction, of involving plants and biosensors into data displays. And if you're interested in this, also for listeners, Nassim Parvin at the University of Washington does some really cool projects called Sensing Bodies with these kinds of human non-human interactions. I wanted to ask next about big data and, you know, the phase that we went through a while back where big data or more data was seen as the answer. And actually Kevin Guyon, who's a scholar of queer data or collecting queer data in censuses, has a lot to say about this. But as we've seen with climate change, more data doesn't necessarily result in better policy around climate change, because both data and policy are political. So, what kind of environmental data are you collecting, and how are you collecting it?
So one of the projects that's actually an offshoot of the Sonic Kayaks project, because I mentioned briefly we were collecting air pollution data for that, and that turned out to be quite interesting. So we sort of have this other thread, this other project that we've just coming to the end of at the moment. So we've been building air pollution sensors, giving them to community groups, and helping them process the data and collect it. And it's kind of an area where there are hundreds of open source air pollution sensors, lots and lots of work that we could base this on and make our own, yet another sort of open hardware air pollution sensor. But our approach, and I suppose actually this kind of comes into being kind of aware of the politics of technology, is that through kind of a lot of our work, we do a lot of work with local government, and we have a sort of understanding of the limitations and the possibilities of working in that area. And so what we want to do is an air pollution project where there was actually a chance that we could change laws based on the data collected. And so that can be as simple as collecting the right units. So collecting data that's comparable to what your local council are collecting. So they can say, oh, actually, yeah, I can compare this with what we're measuring, and this is quite bad. We need to do something. Whereas a lot of air quality sensors that you can buy just have like 1 to 10, bad air quality, good air quality, or something, as a kind of a measurement to tell you as an individual, but it doesn't really have much use outside of that. This is actually, of course, because it's a really hard thing to do. So we've had to calibrate our sensors against local government sensors and put them in the same place and check the data actually matches what they're collecting, which involves having a local government that's quite friendly and allowing you to do that, which ours luckily have been in Cornwall Council. And partly that,
Shout out.
shout out to Cornwall Council, but that's partly because they're really happy to have a community group that isn't then working on something like this with their residents, because they can help us. And it's almost like, they help us, but then people don't see that directly. And then it can help raise awareness of this. And then people then talk to their elected officials about it.
Incredible. And it's super important people aren't comparing apples and oranges. Obviously you need to have the same metrics. Otherwise, how can you possibly interpret the information you receive?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, it's just a case of, so we did a sort of a trial of this a few years ago, where we gave a local community group some data, just some graphs that we plotted showing kind of the times at which it was above the WHO sort of limits for a 24-hour exposure. And they could then take that to a consultation session about changes in the road. And they said to us, it just made us feel like we weren't just a bunch of hippies. We actually have some data. And then suddenly everybody listened to us, and it was taken a bit more seriously. And that's kind of what it's about. It's just elevating the ability for people to actually make some changes. Because I think everybody knows what needs to be done. It's not that isn't so much the problem. It's pushing this awareness onto the people that can make a change, if the people that vote for them actually are worried about it.
Yeah, it's amazing how powerful statistics are. And my colleagues who work with femicide data collection sort of battle against the need to create statistics that will always be insufficient, because they will never be able to get the statistics that reflect reality, the reality of femicide in Latin America, but also collecting stories at the same time, as stories are also things that can be passed on and speak to an issue in a more qualitative way. I guess, in Cornwall, when people experience pollution, they tell stories about pollution, like, oh, I don't know what people might say, but to have the data that shows that actually Cornwall as a region that is assumed, I think, by the rest of the UK as being quite like a seasidey, outdoorsy, countryside, healthy, non-polluted area, the data is important.
Yes. So yeah, it's just as bad in sort of on busy roads in places as it is in cities. It's just super, super localized. So I think the same's true in cities. A lot of places aren't as bad as you probably think, and a lot of places are kind of hotspots for that. But yeah, in terms of stories, I think one of the nice things that we were doing with this smog off project, it's called, is that the sensors. So a lot of air quality sensors are kind of hidden. They're made into grey boxes and hidden away so that you can't see them, so that they don't get stolen, I suppose. And we decided to go the other way, where we make them really visible. And we put screens on them that you can read, that are telling you this is an air quality sensor, this is what we're measuring, this is a URL you can go out to find out more, and just a smiley face, sad face, or a neutral face as a kind of executive overview of the situation, live kind of information. And we found that was really interesting, because just putting it out, you get groups of people wanting to know more, gathering around it, talking about it. Some people saying they're going to change their cycle route because they didn't realize that this was a bad road, and wanting to talk about this, because a lot of people are worried about it. And yeah, kind of, it's as much telling people about when it's not a problem as it is making people alarmed. It's a complicated situation, I think.
And we shouldn't be gathering data in the darkness and labs away from people. We should be doing it in public, where people can see and talk about the findings that we have. Data's not as complicated as people might think it is.
Yeah, yeah.
As we're running out of time, can you, in the last couple of minutes, tell us about some of your work unraveling the hidden histories of technology? We know a lot about Ada Lovelace, or you should do if you're listening and you haven't heard of her, and the Luddite rebellions and the Jacquard looms, but there's so much we don't know about. You've investigated the Navajo women designing Fairchild semiconductors. So what does AI innovation owe to them?
So this is part of a project that began with a researcher we're working with called Ellen Halutsius-Kluck. And this was a project called the Penelope Project, looking at the history of digital thinking. So this is going right back to the ancient Greek times and looking at how weavers of antiquity were manipulating information, manipulating patterns in just the same way as we do today when we're programming. And this is sort of based on the fact that it's very difficult for people to understand. So the idea of digital technology didn't start in the 90s. It didn't start with transistors. It didn't start even with jacquard looms and punch cards. It actually goes right back to prehistory. So the idea of digital is just a combination of discrete elements rather than continuous. And the sort of the thinking process that's involved with threads that can only go over or under each other is just the same as voltages that we read as ones or zeros. And a lot of this is hidden. So a lot of this is feminine technology. A lot of this is people involved in craft, what we now see as crafts, that is sort of sidelined. And so, yeah, a good example of that is actually Lisa Nakamura, who did the research on the Navajo weavers. And so, yeah, this is one of the first producers of integrated circuits, and they happened to put their factory on a Navajo reservation. Whether this was due to maybe not having to pay people as much, but they were actually quite proud of this because they put their weaving on the catalogue. Basically, these skills that the Navajo women used in the weaving was being translated into designing transistors on circuits. And they do look exactly like they look like they're coming from the same place. So these weavings, and if you see the Navajo weavings, they are incredible. And they do look like integrated circuits. And so this idea that these threads, the threads of history come through into the digital devices we use today. And so that's the work that has sort of continued with Alex McLean, who's doing a fellowship with us, a Future Leaders Fellowship. And we're looking at how digital or heritage crafts and digital technology sort of share this common history, and how much digital technology can learn from a fuller understanding of creativity and all of these sort of feminist approaches. And yeah, it's quite a big area.
Where can we find these pictures of this incredible project?
So thentrythis.org is our website.
Say that again.
Thentrythis.org is our organization. And from that, you can find links to all these different projects.
Well, we've begun and ended with this beautiful scene of you and your mother, weaving and coding together, and the proximity between those two things, especially today. And I don't know whether you've listened to, there's an episode that will be coming out before this with Sabeta Matsumoto, who also incorporates weaving and weaving techniques into tech design and coding. But beautiful work. Thank you so much, Dave, for coming on and telling us your stories and about your projects.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been really fun.
This episode was made possible thanks to Stiftung Mercator and the Leverhulme Trust. It was written and produced by me, Dr. Eleanor Drage, and the editor of this week's episode is credited in the episode's description. Thanks for listening.